Howdy y'all, my name's Will Watson. I'm a joint degree student at the Bush School of Government and Public Policy here at Texas A&M University, and I'm coming at you with the February Public Forum debate topic, resolved on balance, Turkey's membership is beneficial to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The topic community and topic committee has apparently decided that NATO topics are what we should be focused on this year. As an international affairs guy who enjoys international politics, I enjoy these topics. But this topic is an interesting one. Today we're going to do a little bit of background, then we're going to go into framework, then we're going to go con and then pro, and then finally we'll conclude and I'll give you just some last minute thoughts. Thank you for Champion Briefs for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all today. Really appreciate it. They're a great place to find resources. A lot of the evidence that I say is out there is on the Champion Briefs brief. So I recommend using it, and good luck this season. Let's start with some background. Turkey joined NATO in 1952, making them one of the older NATO allies. With that, it's important to recognize that Turkey's participation in NATO has been vital from a strategic perspective over the past few decades. If you look back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, Turkey played a role there. I highly recommend reading on the history, but recently it's become a more and more contentious role. If you look up Turkish F-35 sale, you can see that because Turkey bought the S-400 missile system from Russia, that the U.S. refused to sell them F-35s because they said that the F-35s were inoperable with the S-400. Whether or not that's true, there's certainly been degrading relationships there. Additionally, if you look up Turkey human rights violations, you can see that NATO hasn't been really eager for Turkey's human rights violations, and Turkey has been a little bit of a political player in the NATO sphere, where they vetoed certain things because they wanted their own concessions. Now, some could say this is just politics, but NATO requires consensus to operate. At that point, Turkey hasn't been the best at providing that consensus. A few things on the framework debate that I want everyone to be aware of. First, this is not a should topic. The topic that I think the topic committee would have been better off with is resolved, Turkey should be removed from NATO. That topic suggests that there is an action. This topic does not suggest there is an action. It is a fact-based topic. The resolved on balance, if you look at old policy debate files, resolved means a legal action. On balance means you're weighing two different things. This topic is a contradiction of terms. However, it is the topic that you are forced to debate. Looking at the topic, another failure in writing it is the phrase is beneficial to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That means that all of your impacts need to go back to NATO. NATO could completely ruin Turkey. NATO could completely ruin the world in this topic, but if the pro can prove that Turkey's membership is solely beneficial to NATO and the con never connects their impacts back to NATO, the con or the pro wins the round. If you say that Turkey's membership in NATO results in China blowing up and billions of deaths, but that doesn't hurt NATO, the pro still wins the round. So be aware of this and don't fall into the pitfall. Now, I'm going to go back a little bit on what I said when I said that this isn't suggesting a policy action, because you're going to have to pretend it does in order to have an educational debate. The way you do that is by doing a two-world analysis. Imagine Turkey in NATO, imagine Turkey out of NATO. One world where Turkey is not a member in NATO, and another world where they are. And so keep that in mind, because a lot of teams are going to just say Turkey bad. Turkey bad does not apply to this topic. Now, Turkey bad, which means NATO bad, that applies to this topic. And vice versa. If a team stands up and says, hey, Turkey should be in NATO because they're really cool. Okay, but what does that do for NATO? Force your opponent to pull out the impacts on how it affects NATO, because that's what this topic is really asking. This topic is also, I think what the topic writers were going for here is to force teams to define what NATO stands for, because that's something NATO's been having trouble with. On one side, and especially if you look at the realist school of international affairs. On one side, NATO is a strategic alliance meant to counter the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union no longer exists, so instead NATO is countering. And that's when, in the early 2000s, whenever we were considering NATO expansion to the Baltics, a lot of people started saying, wait a second, why is NATO still around? Especially Russia. Russia wanted to know, why is NATO still around? The Soviet Union isn't around. But NATO has been trying to redefine itself. NATO is focused on countering other threats. It's supposed to be an alliance of like-minded countries standing up for global stability. And with that, that brings us into more of the liberalism school of international affairs, which suggests that NATO, by operating as a military alliance, provides a lot more stability, that it's much more beneficial to itself and to the international community, and therefore it justifies itself. I highly recommend reading on realism, reading some Kenneth Waltz, and reading about liberalism, and getting into a lot of that discussion and debate, because if you can understand some of the theories behind NATO and behind NATO's continued existence, I think it's going to make this debate a lot easier for you. Because if you believe that NATO is solely for strategy, that NATO exists to counter countries who are adversarial to the United States and its allies, then yeah, it's a pro ballot. You can argue a little bit that Turkey is strategically bad, but at the end of the day, Turkey's positioning makes it a really nice partner. But if you argue that NATO is now more of a set of values, that it's countries who should be closer, who should all hold themselves to a higher standard, that's easier for a con ballot. And let's get to why. Con team has a lot of really good stock arguments. Sometimes people say, oh no, it's a stock argument. I'm not a unique debater. And to those people, I say, get over it. Just run the stock argument and win the stock argument. Don't try to invent a shape that does not exist, because that's when you get judges like me rolling their eyes. So stock arguments. Turkey's relationship with the following makes it so they are not beneficial to NATO. Those are, an order of countries not on the US's Christmas list: Russia, China, and sort of antagonistic to people we like. I know that's a little bit of a weird phrase, but I'll start with Russia. So as I said, Turkey purchased the S-400 missile defense system. Or excuse me, I'm not sure if it's a defense system, but the S-400 missile system. Now, this missile system does not operate well. Does not operate well from a U.S. strategy perspective. We would have preferred that they purchase a different one, and this is emblematic of a growing partnership with Russia. So there's a lot of people out there who may say, hey, Turkey is getting closer and closer to Russia. If NATO is a strategy-based alliance, we don't want countries getting close with Russia, especially those who are supposed to be in our court. So that's going to be one of the common con arguments on the topic. Another one is Turkey's getting closer with China. China's purchased a lot of investment into Turkey. At that point, you can say China has a very strong economic hold on Turkey. There's a lot of evidence that China and Turkey are working closer and closer together, and there's some evidence that they aren't. It's a debate. And finally, Turkey has been targeting people that we would like them not to. If you look at the Human Security Center in August 2019, Nova Daban, a guest contributor, says that Turkey should be booted for NATO because of it threatening to bomb those that we were trying to get to fight ISIS. That's something we don't like. The other major con argument is going to be human rights. Turkey has bad human rights. Turkey should be kicked out of NATO because of how bad their human rights are. I'm not going to get into the atrocities. Team should be well versed in these. Just know that Turkey has not upheld human rights to the degree that NATO would like them to. And the last one I'll mention, Turkey's relationships with Greece make them bad for NATO. Greece is another NATO partner. Turkey and Greece have a long-standing historically difficult relationship. And with that, it's really easy to go ahead and say, hey, Greece is a better NATO ally. They'll leave unless Turkey leaves. We gotta do something. But remember, Greece and Turkey joined in order to try to resolve those differences. And let's get into the rebuttal of the con. So now we're getting onto pro, and let's rebut these arguments real quick. With the Russia argument, Russia and Turkey are more frenemies than friends. And I'll get into this discussion more on the pro. Turkey's been selling drones to Ukraine. Turkey opposed Russia in the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict. Whenever it comes to military, aside from this one S-400 sale, Turkey and Russia haven't really been on the same page. They're not strategic partners. So there's a lot of good evidence out there to say, no, this is false. The U.S. was just overblown and insulted. And that's the way it goes sometimes. With China, there's some evidence out there that Turkey really had no choice. That it was an economic collapse. It needed the investment, and NATO wasn't providing that investment. The EU wasn't providing that investment. You know who was? China. And so they were forced into a difficult relationship with China. Once again, you should be able to argue very successfully on the pro that Turkey's relationships with these countries are just being open to trade and not antagonistic with the rest of the world. That the U.S.'s approach is actually the flawed one. I think a lot of ground can be gained there and saying, look, NATO countries like France and Germany aren't antagonistic to these countries either. A lot of our Eastern European allies have signed on with China. Why are we singling out Turkey? And there's some really good arguments to be made with that. But then with the argument with the fighters and with human rights, I'll group those two together. I think you should make the argument that this is non-unique. With or without NATO, this would have happened. So let's move full on into the pro. Pro has a lot less stock arguments, which is really nice. Expect pros to be running things that you wouldn't think of, and get some really good weighing on the con prepared whenever you debate the pro. But the first argument I think every pro on this topic should run is Ukraine. Turkey selling Ukraine drones is a huge asset, and it shows that they are a continued strategic partner of NATO. I think teams should also run the argument that Turkey's location makes them a necessary partner to NATO. If you look at it, it is right up it's right up on Russia. It's right up on the Black Sea. Turkey has a good strategic position. And with that, you should be willing to go so far to say that, hey, look, we may not like them, but they control some strategic access that we would like. But with that, Turkey offers a nice buffer state. They're not right on the border of Russia. They're a little bit south, but they're close enough that positioning missiles in them really scares Russia. Other pro arguments is that Turkey is a really good arbitrator. That Turkey can act as that middleman between the U.S., Russia, the U.S., and China as a neutral body. That yes, they may be in NATO, but if they're friendly with these people, then they're more likely to be accepted. You should be able to force those concessions and cross. With the pros saying, look, yeah, Turkey's done some things that we don't like. That doesn't mean that they're not beneficial. That just could actually mean that they're not biased. So there may be some ground to gain there. With these pro arguments, kind of refuting them, with the Ukraine stuff, I think using the phrase that Turkey would do this regardless, that Turkey wants to sell weapons, Ukraine is a willing buyer of weapons. That can be effective. With the idea that Turkey is really good for diplomacy, I think that you can say that no, they're not. They haven't displayed enough of the historical context to say that they are. But I think that's a little more difficult to refute. I think smart pros will take some of the more beneficial things Turkey's done. I think you can say that Turkey not that Turkey gives consensus when consensus is absolutely necessary, but they don't give consensus whenever there should be more discussion. And you can even start cross by saying, is debate bad? And you'll get a chuckle from the judge, and your opponent will get mad at you, which is always nice. So I'm not going into a lot of pro arguments here, because the pro is going to have a lot more defensive ground, because the evidence for Turkey is actually a better NATO partner, even though blah, 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 is out there. Now, the evidence, and that evidence is often a lot better than the evidence that con teams are going to bring out. That's not to say that I think Turkey is beneficial to NATO, but you just need to realize that the pro is going for a more unique case, while the con has a lot more stock arguments. And make your strategy adjusting. Remember, in this debate, it's going to be really important to weigh your arguments, especially if you're a con team. Getting your arguments out there first could be really good as the con team, especially with judges wanting you to take the rebuttal. If you're speaking second and use that to refute the first rebuttal, if I was a con team, if, let's say, my opponent flipped and they go, okay, I want to go pro for the unique arguments. If I was con, I would go first. The reason why I would do that is because I want to get my arguments out there first. I want to weigh my arguments first. And then in rebuttal, I want to take the entire 4 minutes to refute my opponent's case, rather than going and having to spend that time addressing the first rebuttal and refuting. I want more time to just drop all that evidence and to continue weighing. But I know a lot of teams are going to be hesitant for this strategy. I wish everyone the best of luck debating virtually. Remember, do also the 2-world weighing. Talk about what if Turkey wasn't a member of NATO. As always, keep on researching. Stay in the know. Take care.